Hi, I'm Debbie Brown with DebbieBrownQuilts.com, and I just finished piecing this wonderful strip quilt from 4th and Main Designs. It's called Tuscan Vintage, and it was designed by the incredibly talented Scott Flanagan. I'm going to show you how I quilted this quilt. Not only the focus block, but the block that is made in the secondary pattern in the corners. Take a look and see. The first thing I'm going to decide when quilting my Tuscan Vintage quilt is what thread to use. Now, I'm going to give this quilt away as a charity quilt, so I know I'm only going to use one thread color. I don't want to keep making knots. So I'm pulling out my 10 most popular machine quilting threads, and these are all cotton. So what I do when I decide what to quilt, what thread to use when I quilt, is I start taking them away. Probably not going to use the pink, probably not going to use the black. Red could be interesting, as could yellow, but no. I would actually be fine with any of these 6 colors. This icky green matches everything, but I'll put that aside. I think that this dark blue is too dark for everything, for the white areas in here, so I'll put that aside. This tan is an interesting choice because tan really would blend with this entire quilt. That would be great. I'm still going to put that aside. The 3 that's left me with is white, a light gray variegated, and a medium gray variegated. So all 3 of those are pretty neutral, and since I'm just trying to decide, I'll pick the middle one. So I'm going to use this 3 color, it's gray, cream, and taupe, variegated, and I am going to custom quilt this quilt using only this thread color. So this is Lamb from Wonderfil, and the thread is called Tootie. I use this 50 weight cotton in the needle, and then I use an 80 weight deco bob in the bobbin. I next want to decide how I'm going to quilt this large block. And my favorite machine quilting pattern is Ribbon Candy. Ribbon Candy looks like this. I can do it freehand, but you can also use a stencil. So I can take my stencil, put it over each piece, and take a pounce pad and swipe it. So this pounce pad is blue, there's powder in it, and I'll swipe it. It transfers the marking, and I'll follow that along. So I would stitch Ribbon Candy, Ribbon Candy, Ribbon Candy, and do that all the way around. In the center of the block here, I would do something simple, like continuous curve. So that's how I plan on quilting this block. Putting these blocks together forms a nice offset block here. This is the corner. And I want to stitch a feathered wreath, a simplified feathered wreath. And I need a circle around here to make my feathered wreath. So I actually go into my kitchen and start grabbing round things to see what size circle I want. Well, I think my plate is too big, so we'll put that aside. I think this bowl is going to work well. And this is my very precise way of measuring that it's in the center. I now have that as my spine for my simplified feather wreath. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make spirals like that for each of the feathers, and I'll probably do a pumpkin seed, which is more of those continuous curves from corner to corner, here, here, and all the way around this block. So I'll take it to the machine and show you how it's going. I've pre-marked my quilt for the feathered wreaths, but I'm going to start on the block. The quilt is oriented so that the narrow side is going across, the long side is up and down, and I've started in the middle of the quilt. This is the easiest way to quilt a large quilt on a home sewing machine. I'm going to start in this corner, this top corner here. Needle down, needle up, pull up the bobbin thread. That'll give me all of my threads at the top. I'm going to hold them under a little bit of tension and take a couple stitches. That's my knot, and it will hold. And I'm going to hold those tails as I start stitching. I'm going to stitch Ribbon Candy going across this one strip of fabric. I'm using that lamb cotton thread. It's light, it's light, so it will show up on some of these darker blues, but it's not perfectly white, so it will also show up on the white background. That's why I picked that, that variegated color. Now, ribbon candy doesn't have to touch the top or the bottom. It doesn't have to touch its neighbor. It's just a way of filling the quilt. And for me, it's fun. It's a fun way to spend an afternoon. And now I'm going to make some shorter ribbon candies to fit in this triangle area here. So I finished that first one, and I'm going to stitch diagonally down here to get to the point of the second row of this 3-row piece in the block. So that's just kind of a fake stitch in the ditch there. Now I'm going to stitch my way back. Pause whenever I need to move my hands or rearrange the quilt, because I don't want the quilt pulling off the table in any direction. And now I'm going to stitch that 3rd row across. So I've stitched to the end. Now I'm going to do that little bit of stitch in the ditch here to get my thread back to where I want to start the next row. And I'm going to stitch ribbon candy going down, back up, and back down. So I finished almost finished half of this block, but I still need to stitch this little square in the middle. So before I stitch this 3rd row here, I'm going to sneak my way over, little stitch in the ditch, And I'm going to stitch a curve from this point to this point, and across, and back up, and back over. Now I'll finish by stitching ribbon candy down. Just making sure the quilt is freely moving. And I've worked my way over to the third side. So I'm going to stitch this going out and back in. Stitch slowly to the next corner. And I'm going to work my way back out again. And then I'm going to stitch the last row of 3s going in the up direction. I loved stitching these each in their own direction because I think it really adds to the motion of the block. Now it's looking good. So now I can make a knot. Let's take a couple stitches that overlap, bring my needle up, and then I can pull away and cut my threads. So there's the finished block. I'm really happy with the way that turned out. If free motion quilting, continuous curve, and ribbon candy isn't natural to you, I advise you to check out my First Steps to Free Motion quilting class where I teach both of these. Use Scott's link in the video description. I'm quilting this quilt, a rather large quilt, on my home sewing machine on a rather cool autumn day. So I'm wrapped underneath the quilt. It's about halfway into the machine, halfway onto actually a folding table that I put up next to my sewing machine. But I wanted to show you this is really done on a home machine, and I'm wearing the quilt. So let's move in to quilt this offset block. Now, we did continuous curve on the center of the pieced block, and I'm going to do a version of curves, and it's going to be a curve from this point to this point and back all the way around. Kind of looks like a pumpkin seed. And I haven't found a way to do this continuously, so I will make my own knot here. So needle down, needle up, pull up the bobbin thread, take a couple stitches, make a curve up to the top. I like to trim my threads as I go and groom the quilt if there's any other threads poking through from piecing. So there's one petal. Now I'll do another. I'm going to slow the machine down just a little bit. I put my foot all the way down on the foot pedal so that I don't have to worry about how fast or slow I'm going. That felt a little fast. And the fourth one. Take a couple stitches in the middle, needle up. And here, since I'm in the middle of the quilt and not toward the end, I'm going to go needle down, needle up, and I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread using the top thread so I don't have to reach under the quilt and take it out from under the needle. So now I'm going to start stitching feathers going around here, around the pre-drawn center spine. What I'm not going to do is make heirloom quality feathers. These are going to be spiral filigree feathers. So I'm going to start with a knot out here. You can pick anywhere you like on the circle, they're all the same. And I'm going to start with an outer spiral. So I'm going to make my knot. Let's get back to where I started. There we go. And and I'm going to trace it badly back to the center. I want to see the both pieces of the thread. I want to see both lines. Then I'll move ahead and stitch another spiral. And back out. Now, when I get up to this part of the quilt, there's more fabric. It's not a perfect corner because it's an offset block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend it's a perfect corner from here to here and stitch my feathers along that line. And when I put another feather here, it'll have this angled off and there'll be nothing quilted in here. But let's see if I can fix that. All of my feathers are quilted. I'm halfway through this one, but I do have this little bit of fabric right here that doesn't have a feather in it. So what I'm going to do is stitch back to here. And I'm going to stitch just another spiral here. To fill that space. Let me continue on around my feathered wreath. It gets interesting because I have to see what's behind my needle here. See that this thread is not white, 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 so it's showing up just a little bit, but it's not screaming at you as if you're using a darker thread. It actually gives it more of an antique-y vintage look. Now I'm getting back up to the next corner. Where I'm going to try to do the same feathered corner treatment that I did over here. So now I'm going to swing down and put a feather up here, spiral up here. Stitch down the next side. because I'm manipulating a large quilt, I always want to make sure it's not getting stuck or hung up anywhere. Okay, I forgot to go and do the corner there, so I just retraced again. The world hasn't ended. Stitch in this last extra space. And now I only have to finish maybe 3 or 4 feathers, and the outer round of feathers is done. And one more. Close that circle. My outer feathers on the feathered wreath are finished. I'm now going to put feathers on the inside, but I'm going to stop them before they get to that blue pieced mark. There is more space for feathers along the spine than there is up along the diamond, so I'm going to have to compromise on how I make my feathers. So there, I stitched one out to the seam. And then I stitched a short one. Another one out to the seam. So I'm going to finish by pulling the thread away after I've made my knot, holding the top thread, needle down, needle up to catch that long bobbin thread, and I can trim everything here. Here's the finished block, and I think it looks fabulous. What's fun with machine quilting is that sometimes the offset block can be a better space to showcase your machine quilting than the center block itself. If feathers are a challenge, I go into step-by-step details of how to quilt this spiral feather in my First Steps to Free Motion Quilting class. Use Scott's link in the description below to check out that class. And I will be starting a 10-week feather class on how to stitch feathers on your home sewing machine in January of 2021. So subscribe to my newsletter at debbiebrownquilts.com to find out more information about my ongoing classes. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and for more quilty goodness, subscribe to my newsletter at debbiebrownquilts.com.